All right, we are live. It is Thursday, September 18th, 2014. It's 11 a.m. Pacific, and this is DB Hangouts. Today we're going to be talking about Postmortems, MySQL SYS, and a few other things after that, I think. So real quick, let's do a round of introductions. My name is Jeff Anderson. I'm a DBA at Box. And why don't we go to Mark next?
Hey, I'm Mark Leith. I'm a development manager with MySQL at Oracle.
Okay, Shlomi.
Hey, I'm Shlomi. I'm engineer at Outbrain.
Tim.
I am Tim Callahan from Tokutech.
And Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a database consultant for Snow.
Okay. And actually, real quick before we get started, Tim has an announcement. If you want to make that real quick, Tim.
Sure. We are releasing TokuDB version 7.5 today. And we went with a big number because we've added a feature we call read-free replication. So, Jeff, what I want to try to do is talk to you about maybe carving out 20 minutes or so 2 weeks from today, and I'll explain what we've done, and maybe take some knocks from you guys, give me some pros and cons about what it is. But you know, very high level, it just means your slaves process the replication stream, letting fractal trees do what they do best, which is absorb, as opposed to read, modify, write on updates or doing probes for uniqueness testing. So I'll go into it more in 2 weeks if we can find time to go over that. Okay.
We might even have time today. We'll see. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. And we got one other person who just joined the call. Ben, I don't know if your microphone's working, if you want to introduce yourself real quick. Your microphone is muted. So real quick, Ben, if you hover near the top of the video screen, there's a microphone icon. Just click that. Okay, well, we'll figure that out in a second. So why don't we go ahead and just kind of get started on the first topic, which is postmortems. And I think high level, what we were some of the thoughts around it were, how do folks do postmortems? What's your process look like? Has your process evolved and changed in any way? And I guess I'll open it up. I'd actually love to hear from Shlomi first, if you can. Unless, actually, Ben, I think you got your mic on now. If you want to say something. Still no dice. All right, go ahead and take it away, Shlomi, and I'll start chiming in a sec.
Shlomi, you're muted as well.
All right. Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm happy to share the way we do postmortem, or take-ins, as we call them. So the idea is that something's gone bad, something crashed, services were unavailable, whatever, something that hurts the business, and then need to figure out, how not to have this happening again, right? So I think the company, found a fairly decent way of handling this, of talking this through, that is neither too talkative. I mean, we don't sit for hours in the same room, on one hand. We don't get sidetracked too much because the process is pretty short, and it's limited. It's actually bounded by the amount of sidetracks that you can make. And then the third part is that it pretty much enforces action. So we usually have, once something's been gone through taking, it usually doesn't happen again. It actually works. So on occasion, something slips through. So I'm happy to share this process. So we basically have this template of a document, and we have like 10 questions we need to answer. And the first few are very simple. It's like, okay, who are the participants, and what is the incident story? I mean, in 3 or more sentences, just free text, just tell us what happened. And we would then go through like 5 or 6 questions that relate to monitoring, like was there an alert? Was the alert justified? Was the alert actionable? Can the bug ever be prevented in the future? I mean, is there any technical solution to that? We're not asking for the technical solution yet, but do you think there is a solution to that? Was the alert in, if there was an alert, was the alert in escalation process okay? I mean, we got to the right people, or the services kicked in automatically, failovers, whatever. Was there an escalation process? And were all the people available and responsive? So, at this time, these are pretty much very straightforward questions that you're easily able to say yes, no. Maybe a bit more complicated on whether the action is preventable in the future. And then we get down to the really most important stuff, and that's the root cause analysis that we call the 5 whys. We're going to ask 5 questions, exactly 5 questions, that all begin with a why. So let's say our service was down. So the first question would obviously be, why was our service down? Okay, let's say it's something to do with MySQL. Okay, the service was down because all the MySQL slaves were lagging, therefore could not produce some important data. The next question would be, okay, why were all the MySQL slaves lagging? And then, whatever the story is, okay, someone was bumping the master with, inserts, and thus the slaves were lagging. Okay? Why was someone pushing the master to its limits? Or otherwise, maybe we can find another question like, okay, why does the master let people abuse it? Right, so we figure out our own questions. We drill down from the first why. We don't extrapolate and get sidetracked to all sorts of. You just pick the 5 questions you want to answer that you think are relevant, and these usually cover enough portion of the story so that by the time you get to question 5, you're pretty much deep into the root cause. You don't need to go much deeper. You pretty much get to something that relates to human behavior, or something that is in the culture, or in a wrong decision making, or just some very root design problem that hasn't been thought of thoroughly. And that's pretty awesome because you only ask 5 questions. You don't sit around the table and argue for like 3 hours. 5 questions, and you pretty much nail it.
So Shlomi, I actually had a question about that.
Sure.
Do you feel like when you get to that 5th question at the bottom that you have like an actionable thing that you can get done in the next like couple days or couple weeks, or is it sometimes just like a problem like, oh yeah, God, we all agree we've got this terrible situation here, but we're not gonna be able to fix it?
Right. There has to be an action taken. That's the next step. What are the action items? There has to be at least one. It could be, okay, it's like you say, some things can't be solved. I don't know, maybe it's too complex. At the very least, maybe we can improve the alerting so that, human action kicks in earlier. But usually we do find, an actionable item that is, put some developers into that and solve that. It all depends on the emergency and how terrible was that crash, how terrible was that downtime.
Right.
But there's always an actionable item, and we always follow up. It doesn't get lost. We follow up on any taking. There's no open taking. You have to do the actionable items you declared. You stated there would be an action. You have to do that action. That much has to be done. And since you're not getting too sidetracked when analyzing the problem, you don't get to like 10 action items which are, completely blowing you off your tracks. You're taking 1 or 2 action items that will help you in the future. Maybe they will not dissolve the problem completely, but the next time, if it happens, will be a lot better. So
Okay.
I think it's a reasonable way of containing a situation and not getting blown off by pulling large teams of engineers to do stuff that you're really focusing on a point. So this is it actually. This is the procedure.
So I had another question, if you guys don't mind if I jump in again. How do you track those action items? You said you make sure that they happen. I'm curious how you do that.
Right. So we publish any taking on our wiki. We have a global company wiki, and it's published. And we always announce, something happened. Maybe there wasn't even a downtime for the service, but it might have caused a downtime. We say, okay, we had this problem today. We're going to do a take-in, and then we'll publish the results. And then we do publish the results, and everybody reads. Everyone who wants to reads those results.
Right.
And we have like dozens of take-ins, throughout the history of our company, and the managers read those wikis. Everyone reads those wikis, and we just follow up. There's always someone to follow up and see that it's done. But regardless, there's always one owner to any take-in. So maybe I would be the owner if that was a pure MySQL related problem. I would take ownership. Then it would be my personal duty to make sure the actionable item was, was taken care of.
But I guess so. The problem that we had here is, a person does take ownership, but let's say that person, you have 10 other critical things you need to be working on. How does it work its way into that list of priorities?
Yeah, I mean, if you got to the point that you need to do a take-in, that means something pretty bad has happened. Either it influenced your service, which means influenced your business, in an immediate sense, or it might have been so, and you were lucky enough that it went below the radar. So it just pretty much gets higher priority than most stuff. It gets a high priority. I can tell that it's top priority, but these things are being pushed, up the priority scale.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so real quick background, and sorry, now that Ben's microphone is working, Ben, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my name's Ben. I work with Jeff at Box. I am on the core infrastructure team. I just do a lot of coding, and over the past year, I've actually just kind of led a bit of a crusade with our site incidents, and spent a lot of time asking 5 whys about why our postmortem process works or why it doesn't, and trying to get to a better place. And we've made really quite a lot of progress. It's been pretty exciting. And Jeff just asked me to kind of jump in today because you guys were talking about the subject. So I'm interested in learning what works for you guys and what doesn't.
Yeah, and so something I wanted to call out about it was basically what you just described, Shlomi. That's our process is pretty close to that now, and it's been like Ben was saying, it's been this very long effort and kind of getting things tuned and cleaned up a little bit so the process is better every time someone has to do a postmortem. Because I remember when I started here 3 years ago, postmortems there was an outage. If you were on call, you were the poor guy that got stuck doing it. You would probably give a PowerPoint at the next all-hands meeting for the operations team, and there would be this laundry list of action items, and they would just be tickets that get filed, and some of them would get done, some of them wouldn't. And over time, things definitely got groomed to a point where, really trying to hammer down to the root cause, which, like you had said, is almost always a people or process problem. Sometimes there's a code problem that can happen. And then, really identifying the absolute most impactful things that you can do to address that and make sure it doesn't happen again. And I mean, ultimately, that's the thing is, if you have something someone made a typo or there was a human error, one of the first questions is it documented what you had to do? I mean, if the answer is no, we should document it and have a repeatable process that we can do for something like that. And I mean, that's one of the most common failings is, that coming from when you go from a smaller to a larger company, or when the company's evolving that way, there's a lot of that tribal knowledge that needs to really just kind of get codified and documented somewhere. And until it's there, the chance of these kind of things happening is pretty high. And so actually, I was going to say, or I wanted to ask too, Daniel, have you had to deal with any postmortems in your kind of day-to-day? And, is your process similar, or is it more open-ended?
Yeah, I've been working for quite a number of companies the last few years, and most of the time it's all the same. But one of the last postmortems I had to do, or actually still have to do, because the incident happened a few weeks ago, and they were still planning to do the postmortem, and never really happened. So I made my own list of things which needed to be done, and followed up on it, and that quite fixed the issue. But yeah, I would have preferred to have a more company-wide postmortem, but it was working quite well. And with the postmortems, it can be quite. It's really a company effort, not only a team effort, because having someone from the business attending can be really helpful, because they can tell what exactly the impact was, and how important how it impacted the business.
Okay. And actually, and Mark and Tim, I'm curious, like, do you guys ever have to deal with postmortems in your day-to-day work now, or?
Yeah, I'll go first. We do, as an engineering organization creating TokuDB for MySQL or Maria, process-wise, we might do a postmortem after a release because something went badly with, like, a process wasn't followed, maybe a design documentation wasn't written for something that when it came time for code review, it was hard for code review because if you didn't understand the intent or the design to apply, there was so much homework to do without a design to actually get in there. But a question I wanted to ask a little differently with respect to postmortem and the operational experience in the room, I think, is helpful for me. What do you do for, let's say you moved a new release into production, one of you guys, and you end up with some kind of intermittent, or non-deterministic bad behavior where once a day, on average, a server just gets really unhappy, and to get the smoking gun, at TokuTech sometimes we get a person, they get a bad behavior, and they're able to kind of understand when it's going to come, and we're like, hey, if you could run poor man's profiler or get us a stack trace, the hard questions to be solved. But I'm wondering, in your environments, do you have stuff ready to go watching your servers so when it detects bad behavior, it just wakes up and starts collecting data? Or does it wait? Is it they let it happen once and then we'll keep an eye on that server type of problem?
I'm going to jump right on this because I actually did a postmortem, or we have one that we're getting ready to roll together, and it was 3 separate incidents that we correlated to the same root cause. We encountered a very nasty index merge bug in MySQL that caused the server to segfault when it was hit, and the condition was specifically a query was doing an index merge and it gets killed while doing an index merge, and that caused the whole server to segfault and crash. And this happened on an active master 3 separate times, and it took a while for us to figure out what was going on. And just to your initial part of the question, Tim, which is operationally, how do you deal with that when this kind of thing is happening? And that's why this postmortem process that we are committed to now has become so important, because we did have a short-term fix we were able to deploy to protect ourselves against it, and it was disabling a very specific code path we had that had the tendency to do an index merge for certain data sets. It wasn't 100%, but it was maybe like 1 in 50 queries of this type would fall back on doing an index merge operation for what was being executed. So we actually disabled that code path, and now things are okay. And it's specifically because doing a minor version, we're in the process of doing a major version upgrade. So going through a minor version upgrade would have been a little laborious just to address this. But yeah, so we have a lot of tools that are always running against our database infrastructure. We have PT-stalk running that's listening for various triggers, CPU spikes, spikes and threads running on the server, which usually indicates a stall of some sort. And when those happen, PT-stalk will run a series of data collections. And when this started happening, we actually enabled a GDB dump core dumps on a server when we encountered that when we think we found what the root cause was. And sure enough, I was able to get a core dump out of a server and crawl through that, crack open the MySQL source code, and find the exact line where there's a bug report open for it. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, next minor version, it's a fixed bug, but that requires doing an upgrade of all of your binaries. And so that was a case, a really bad problem. It happened once. We didn't completely know why. We just thought, oh, it was because we killed a bad query. Happened a second time. Okay, this is actually really bad. And then it happened again the following day while we were doing a root cause analysis. And then we discovered what the problem was, and we were able to get a mitigation, get a deployment, an emergency code deployment out to disable this path so that we wouldn't tickle this kind of bad behavior. But yeah, I don't think we've actually completed our postmortem document for this, unfortunately, because there's a lot of interesting items that need to come out of it. And that's part of the problem is in parts of our organizations we had a large backlog of incidents that hadn't been completely postmortemed. And part of this new process was hammering through those and getting those all caught up and kind of accepting that there are some issues that the environment's changed so dramatically that it's not even worth doing an analysis of the incident now. And other ones where there is still an extreme value in doing it, and to make sure we get those done. But yeah, we had a problem where we just accumulated a lot of incidents, and because of higher priority, keeping things running, they just kind of fell by the wayside. And now that we have an effort to champion getting these done, there's definitely more work being done around it.
You made one comment in your description, and then I'll certainly let someone else go. It sounded to me like you were describing that, and this is a lack of operational experience, which I'm always willing to admit when we talk on these hang-ups. I'm seeing things from the other side. Is it kind of a best practice or normal for me to expect most users of MySQL will start it and not have it enabled to produce core files both in the myCNF or on the command line, as well as the small change you have to make in the kernel to enable core files to be created?
I was going to ask that as well, Tim. I was going to ask if that was something that came out of your postmortem, that you were going to turn that on all of your servers.
No.
I can tell you, because I worked in support for a very long time. And, the answer is no, right? Most people don't enable core files until they crash and get told to enable core files. But then the problem then is you have to basically come back and say, okay, go and re-crash your car again so that I can figure out what went wrong with it, right?
I'm going to use those exact words next time, and I'm quoting you for that one.
It's just like that, right? I mean, I can't tell until you have made it crash again what the problem will be until I can get that core dump. And it's the one thing, or one of the things that I tell everybody to enable. I mean, if you want to figure out why your system is crashing, well, you should always have a core file enabled.
The only downside of that is it really depends on how much heap you have, and part of our problem is we run with over a 200 gig heap on a lot of our systems. So if you have a crash in core dumps, you have to sit and wait for 200 plus gigs of memory to be written to disk. I mean, and that's a long time. I mean, if the server gets pulled out of rotation automatically or something, that's totally fine. And if you've got the disk space, again, totally fine. But if you get stuck in a situation where your server's crashing over and over, you're going to fill up that disk. And that's why we have other things. Currently, we have other things running, and we turn on core dumps when we encounter something that's particularly nasty that cannot be debugged using just the outputs of process list and InnoDB status. Because usually it's just a poorly performing query or something. But for a full-on server crash, if that happens, you either have a corrupt data file or you've hit a bug. Usually, that's like kind of the experience.
Yeah,
and that's when we consider turning on the cores.
For a crash, most of the time you may get a stack trace in the error log, which might lead you to something, but most of the time, at least if it's coming back to us in the engineering group or in support or something like that, they want a core file, right? I mean, they really want to understand what the variables were at the time of the crash and all of that.
Yeah, so I think this kind of a problem is of particular interest to Tim and Mark, who are, producing a binary that everyone's using. But it's not like servers are crashing all day throughout the day. It's a rare thing. So we actually don't do core dumps, and most of the time nothing crashes. This is not the daily problems we are experiencing. So it's not a top thing for us. And if a service seems to crash, yeah, we might choose to just rebuild it, blame the hardware, whatever, just rebuild a new server and not get into that if it's a single server out of 20. We don't really care that much. So it's not a big issue for us to do core dumps. We don't experience many crashes.
I had to enable core dumps last few weeks on a server, which was crashing every hour, and it started suddenly, and it really helped. And we couldn't send the core files to Oracle because it has some sensitive data in there. But analyzing a core file is quite fun to do and quite helpful.
I'll tell you, even if you can't send the whole core file, right, just doing a thread apply all BT full and sending that back to somebody like us gives us a hell of a lot, right? Even without exposing a bunch of stuff, and you can anonymize the query or something like that if that's shown, right? But it gives us a hell of a lot of data.
I did send the stack trace, but I didn't have GDB because it was a Solaris box and had only the modular debugger, and later on with Solaris Studio I was able to get some more info from it.
So actually, I think that sounds like a good topic for the future, is talking a little more about core dumps and how to do them in GDB. And if I can get time, I might be able to put together a demo for the next Hangouts we do. But I wanted to actually try and focus this back a little bit on postmortems again. Jeremy just left. So I'm hoping to get some Jeremy from Etsy to talk a little bit about it there. But in lieu of that, actually, I want to kind of open it up again around, so Shlomi explained the specific things that go into their PM documents and the action items. And I actually want to ask Ben if you wanted to describe some, at least with our postmortems the box, some of the stuff that we're doing and the specific questions we ask as part of our analysis and follow-up work.
Yeah, sure. I guess, one thing I think Tim kind of that you were asking, as far as just, that kind of I think led us into the whole core dump conversation, is so once we get down to the root cause, after we do the analysis and figure out what we feel like the root cause was, we realize that it's not just fixing that defect, because sometimes that's going to be like a 1-month project. It's not that easy. We also have two other things that we need to do, which is we look for escape prevention, which is when we're in a similar situation, again, like rolling out a change or testing something out, how can we prevent this from hitting our master database, or just in general our production services? So is there a staging environment we can test this in first? That sounds obvious, but sometimes it just doesn't occur to you when you're so used to working in production that you need to do that. And then the final thing is just detection. Sometimes you actually fixing the defect is impossible, or it's going to require you to upgrade your binaries, and then that's going to take weeks of planning. But this error could happen at any time until then. So we'll just add as much monitoring as we possibly can, and alerting and escalation, so we can find out immediately when it happens. Sometimes it's already there, but in a lot of cases it turns out that it was just overlooked because this problem hasn't happened before. So at the least, you know when the problem is happening, and you can jump on it right away before your customers start complaining and you're running around frantically trying to figure out what's wrong. So that's it.
But yeah, actually, I mean, is that for you, Tim and Mark? Is that something that happens for you guys when you have I guess a postmortem on some code bug or defect that happens? Is there also work that's put into identifying or being able to detect the defect if it's a large investment of time to correct it, or anything like that? I don't know how that manifests as a producer of the software, but
for us, it depends on the kind of problems that they are, right? I mean, if it was a if it was a serious, I mean, we're talking software bugs and things like that. It's not crashes. It's a software bug that leads to a crash, right, or some wrong results or whatever it may be. And for us, it's trying to figure out if for the serious bugs, for the most part, those are the what went wrong here. Why did we have this problem? It's trying to find out a couple of things. First of all, why it wasn't caught in review, and how we can figure out how to catch it in review better. I mean, we have a pretty rigorous review process across most of our products, right? Everything gets reviewed by at least 2 engineers, and that has been done as part of some of the postmortem. If you've got at least 2 people looking at the code, as well as the developer, the chances are you'll catch some of these things. There's major glaring. But also how it wasn't covered in tests, and making sure that any fixes are actually covered in unit tests or functional testing in spades for those big problems. For a lot of the other normal bugs and things like that, we don't tend to jump on those. It's more the big bad ones that we try and figure out what went wrong with them. And then we've just had a couple of other postmortems, at least on our team. Like Tim was saying, mostly after a release and trying to figure out what went wrong in that release. For us, the big one we had was when we just had a very long release cycle where a whole bunch of things went wrong along the way. And we've been gradually changing processes along the way because of those things. And a lot of it is actually just generally moving into a much more agile model where we can review what, in a much quicker cycle, the problems that are going on, rather than having these huge, long cycles where people are just buried with issues and things like that. So it's been a gradual process, or it's moved into more of an iterative cycle of feedback with the agile method for us.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that a little bit. So, part of, in TokuDB, for example, if a customer reports a bug, our hope is always that we can build a MySQL test runner script to show the bug, and then when the engineer fixes it, the clearing of the fact that MySQL test runner script passes is perfect, right? And then we have that MTR script forever for regression testing. So crashes and correctness is easy in MTR. What's hard is, one of the features we added in this new release that I can go into more detail later is to improve bulk fetch performance. So how do you, with something like MySQL Test Runner, build enough of a database so you can do an operation and convince yourself that with and without the enhancement, you've actually made the query faster, right? Well, we cheat. We add another parameter to TokuDB to say, you know what, pretend an I/O actually takes 5 seconds, not 5 milliseconds. And then we can do things like timers in Perl in MTR to convince ourselves that this optimization actually works. So sometimes there's a lot of hackery to build these reproducers, so you can convince yourself that you fix something and it stays fixed forever. And then to Mark's comment, I guess where it really gets challenging is the end-to-end. If you're improving replication and performance-wise, or you're making the bin log smaller, whatever you're doing there, stringing up these complicated tests across servers and testing some of these aspects gets really challenging, and some of that can only be hand tested. And again, we've got lots of process, but it's not always possible to ensure that every single step of the process got followed. And oftentimes post-mortem is, oops, I didn't create a unit test for that fix I did, or I added a feature and an unintended consequence was a schema I didn't anticipate. And again, you fix that one next time, right? If it pops up, you fix it in the next release, you build the unit test, and you move on to the next feature.
That's great. Yeah, the unit test piece, that's kind of like what we were referring to as the escape prevention. It's like, and that's great. Like when you can add a unit test, you just feel so much more confident that this just is never even going to make it out of your dev environment to production. Mm-hmm. So that's the ideal when you can do it that way.
Cool. And so it looks like Jeremy's here now. Jeremy, is your everything working?
My everything is working.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about the postmortem process at Etsy?
Sure. I'm sorry I jumped in late. It took me a little while to get a room. But so postmortems at Etsy are, there's I think a lot of blog posts about them. Kind of in a nutshell, invariably something goes wrong. You get a bad push, you get a hardware failure, whatever happens. We postmortem a lot of these things. So we will review, pull it together in Morgue, which is our postmortem tracker. That's open sourced on Etsy. So on GitHub, Etsy, there you can find Morgue for the tracker. We do a review of like all of our IRC transcripts to kind of walk through step by step. But that kind of starts off with a summary of the problem and then walking through, and we try to focus on elements of maybe even misdirection. So if throughout the process somebody in chat says, oh, I started looking at our web server logs because I thought it was related to this. A lot of times we'll start a discussion around that to say, well, what led you to think that it was in the web server logs? Because if you find you're going in the wrong direction, then we probably have bad instrumentation around how do you find the answer as fast as possible. So there's a lot of focus on individual points like that. And we work our way through, and then we create remediation items for all the actions that we find that we need to do. So maybe that's, oh, the UI just wasn't very clear for how I roll this particular thing back. It could be we need better unit tests. It could be a whole slew of things. But in the end, it really comes down to tracking those items. And we have a remediation goal of 90 days to get something completely wrapped up and back out into production. Excuse me, not 90, 30 days to get, and those take precedence over all other shipping items because we don't want to reintroduce that particular challenge again.
So, Jeremy, I actually had a question. So this is something we touched on a little bit before you joined. And my name is Ben, by the way. I don't think we've ever met. I work with Jeff at Box. So one of the things we realized with action items is they're not all created equal. And like one of the things that we really had to focus on in our postmortem discussions was, I guess, like just keeping the conversation focused and directed on actionable things that could be accomplished, and what you guys have as 30 days, because otherwise we would come up with like 20 or 30 action items that could potentially take much longer than that, and you kind of like as a team you lose morale because you've got all these action items that aren't getting done, and then you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And I wonder if you guys had like a similar experience or like growing pain.
I think we do. You're absolutely right. Not every item is created equal. Adding a new monitor can be relatively simple. Re-architecting the environment so that you can't possibly introduce that failure is a much larger task. So I think there is definitely a variance in those items. We tend to focus on what can we do in the short term to make sure that we don't reintroduce a problem. And we certainly are mindful of things like, oh, well, that happened because we were running CentOS 5. Okay, well, it's been long enough. We need to rebuild that box. Yeah, that's kind of a project that's in flight, with something else. That generally doesn't get tagged as a remediation item because we probably already have plans to fix it. So for remediations, I would say are probably more focused around additional monitoring, UI changes, process flows, things that are simple to change that accommodate the goal of not reintroducing the problem.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's kind of like where we ended up too. That's really cool. So for us, we use Jira to track all of bugs and projects. So kind of everything just ends up there in Jira, and it could be associated with a site incident or not. Is it similar for you guys, or do you have kind of this separate backlog queue of remediation action items?
It is. I don't remember which element we use in Jira for it, but we do have remediation item trackings. I want to say it is it's either a component or a tag or something along those lines. And then we have a nag script that will send something out to the parties involved, whoever agrees to work on that. So things are actually tracked from a couple of different point of views. In Morgue, you can track all the Jira keys that are associated with that. And then you can also go in and we have the nagger that basically says, hey, you've got remediation items that are overdue. You really need to go fix these, or bad stuff could happen. Trademark.
Cool. Okay. And then let's say someone isn't closing their stuff and it's been like 60 days. Like, is that when John Allspaw just comes with like a bat and starts hitting people?
I've not had the pleasure of seeing Allspaw walking around with a bat. So, as humorous as that might be, he might be a bit too busy, so it might get delegated down. We'll see.
Okay.
I think there certainly are items that slip. I mean, that happens to everybody. You get the majority of what you want done. In the cases that I've been involved, we schedule the postmortem usually as early as possible for things to be fresh on people's minds. But there is always some lag time. So the incident happens on a Friday. You've got a holiday on Monday. You don't get it scheduled till like Thursday of next week. So there's usually like a 3 to 4 day at least before you get a chance to really sit down and talk about it, plus with everybody's schedule and conference rooms and how it goes. Usually by that point, all the key items have already been identified kind of by the person who was running or quarterbacking that particular challenge or incident. And they've either fixed all the items associated or the core ones and they're already closed, or you're down to just a couple. That seems to be the trend here, is that people just grab and go, because especially if you're the one who stops the money train from coming into your station, you kind of have a vested interest in getting yourself back into what might be considered good graces. There's a whole lot written about Etsy's kind of blameless postmortem stuff, which I won't go into great detail here, but having kind of seen how we do things, everybody just feels very empowered. In the cases I've been involved in, where there's been some sort of incident or whatever, usually, I'm very motivated to put the correct monitors or make modifications or make the changes on the recipes or whatever needs to be done to not reintroduce those problems or challenges again. And it's also so nobody else trips over them, because we really try to go a long way on the tooling to make sure that somebody can't do something in a bad way. And that's probably actually the biggest one, is it's never really a person's fault here. It's more what tooling was not in place that would have prevented or caught this before something bad happened. And those can be in the forms of test cases or staging environments or whatnot, or sometimes you just miss something. So for us, what tooling do we need to put in place so that we can't reintroduce that problem again? And so forth.
So something that a question I'd like to pose to everybody is, how does the postmortem process that you have look or change when you are on the hook or need to produce a public-facing postmortem? So like issues happen every day, issues happen all the time, and you probably have to postmortem something at, I don't know, probably once a week, maybe more often, maybe less often. But either way, some of those issues, ultimately, you want to inform your customers and communicate the information. Is there a grooming process that you do? Does that impact the normal postmortem process that you have? And just kind of want to open that up.
Well, I'll jump out there. I think it's been a while since we posted like a public postmortem on Code as Craft. I think it's one we're probably due for. I'm not sure. I think sometimes they get selected as kind of candidates for this is a good one where we really learned a good lesson about how something went, and we really want to share this with not only our customers but also community, because plenty of other ops teams might have these similar challenges. So I don't think it impacts our process very much. I think we try to be as transparent as possible. It turns out that somebody had a bad push that pushed bad code or something like that. I don't think that they're probably not specifically named as saying, if you really didn't like the way that your day went because of this guy, here's his email address, go email him and nag him. But I think it's pretty transparent as far as, we identified that we had a code change that went out that adversely affected performance on the site. Here's how we noticed it. Here's the changes that we made to make sure that's not going to. I don't think that it affects our process very much.
Okay, and actually, like Daniel, Mark, Tim, is there any change on the postmortem process for you guys if you are producing a public or customer-facing one?
I can't remember that I had any postmortems which I had to post publicly, so I can't tell anything about it.
For us on our side, the kinds of things that lead to postmortems are usually the kinds of things like security bugs and crashing, E1, S1, those kind of things. And our process is pretty well defined there. I mean, they're all security type things where they all get announced as part of CPUs, the security patch update releases, and all of that kind of thing. And we have a bunch of processes internally where, and if something like that comes in, then it kicks off the entire dev team, right? There's escalations that go up everywhere. Somebody's got to be working on it 24/7. There's a lot of stuff that happens internally for those kind of things, but we don't generally talk about them externally other than in things like CPU updates and those kind of things. And that's because some big users don't want us to tell the world that how to crash a database, right? That's the reason why we do that. So.
Yeah, we definitely, at Tokutech, it got a lot easier for us to communicate with the community when we open sourced in April of 2013. So prior to that, we were using Track on a privately hosted server. It wasn't publicly available. Our source was in Subversion in a privately hosted repo. So now that we're GitHub for code, and we have a Atlassian hosted Jira for tickets, we have Google Groups. You know, we have a different level of flexibility than Oracle/MySQL would have. In you know, the security issues are going to be coming from above, from Maria, from MySQL. If they patch something and we see the patch and we want to get it out, like when there was that password issue where I think every 256th could sneak past the check, like the patch for that was available quickly from Oracle and from Maria. We took it, built it, tested it really quickly, and got it out. We have that luxury of being a little more agile on things like that. We also have changed our release notes to be extremely transparent and make sure it's very easy to see every single thing we fix. And again, we can only do that now that we're in public-facing issue tracking software and source control.
Yeah, and I can't think of how the process is different for us, because I mean, obviously there's a lot of issues that don't necessarily go up for a public postmortem necessarily, because they could be things that are not that impactful or impact a small percentage of people or other things. And I mean, typically when an incident is initiated, you know, you update a status page or something, or post to Twitter just informing users that some sort of degradation is happening, here's what it is. And unless it's a particularly bad issue, like a full outage of some sort, usually a postmortem isn't required. Or at least, usually a postmortem isn't something you don't usually put up an external-facing one. I mean, Ben, feel free to correct me on any of this, but
yeah, I mean, I'd also just state, like, you know, when you get like real gung-ho about postmortems, like you can, like, something happens in the dev environment that breaks, it's like our customers don't really care. So, but I mean, I think all of us would agree that there's a PR aspect to anything. Like, no matter how transparent you are, like customers probably don't like seeing that like stuff is breaking. So, like, if it's like, I mean, customers definitely appreciate honesty when things do break, that you publish it and you talk about what you're doing to fix it, and that you actually follow up on fixing it. But it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're gonna publish everything, no one even has time to read that. So,
there's definitely an aspect of blissful ignorance as an end user of something.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah.
You are talking about not having any postmortems for the dev environment. I recently had an acceptance environment for which we did a postmortem, because we had a bug there which probably also would have occurred on the production, and it really prevented the bug from hitting production. So I think we are doing postmortems for a production environment and for the acceptance environment.
That's great.
Yeah, and we are too. I mean, you know, customer-facing issues like top priority, obviously, but you know, right after that is anything that impacts the release pipeline, or you know, impacts some significant portion of our development. And that's the thing, is if something like a centralized database for development goes down and it impacts, you know, 200 engineers, that's an issue that needs to be postmortem. We need to know why this happened. Why was there an alert? Did an alert get missed? Things like that.
It's not necessarily like the money train coming in, but there's also like the money train coming out that you have to pay your engineers to work here. So if they can't get their job done, then you're just wasting money. And I think like one thing that kind of like all of us have like briefly touched on, which hasn't explicitly been stated, which is like just like a culture of postmortems that like when you get like as you like push this like step by step, and we've kind of seen this, at least here I've noticed this like over the year 2014, that people start to care more. And I think that like with your last comment, Daniel, it's like that you're like, maybe you're forced to do postmortems in production because it's customer facing, but your acceptance environment is just as important. And that when you build that culture of people who really care about it and get why it matters, then like it's just obvious that you would do it in your acceptance environment too. So I totally agree with you.
So another thing I did want to ask a question about is, does everyone here track some sort of metrics on their postmortems? Outage time, impact time, remediation time, things like that. And does that influence some of the work done around postmortems and their action items? Head shaking.
Yeah, I'll throw some of ours. So we track time of outage, time to detect, so we know how long, if you had monitoring lag or something like that, you want to know how you can find the problem faster, and then we do time to resolve. And that gives us a pretty good sense of kind of where a particular, how quickly it takes you. I really like the time to detect, because you can always go back and figure out how long it's been going on for, but trying to hone in on some things like, do you need to tweak your check intervals, or do you need to reduce the check counts because it's something that never ever goes off until there's actually really a problem. So yeah, the postmortem stuff for tracking, that's really useful.
Yeah, and it's actually I was just checking our GitHub page to see if we put it up yet, but we have a project that one of my coworkers had worked on, and then we had an intern enhance it that pulls a lot of our issue metrics out of Jira ticket fields that we file for all this stuff, and just kind of plots it over time. And another key component of postmortems that we have is what we codify as a taxonomic reason for outage, and it's things like db.hardware issue, or MySQL something, or just kind of some gentle hierarchy that categorizes the problem. And you can have more than one on a given incident. And by using this information, we are able to pretty simply graph just over time, like of all the incidents we've had over the past 3 months, let's say. What's the percentage of them that were MySQL related? What's the percentage that were related to a bug in MySQL, or maybe a hardware issue? And it allows us to easily see, is there a common trend happening? Do we have a lot of hardware failure starting to kick in all of a sudden that's driving a lot of these issues?
Yeah, for us it's more just bug tracking, and we use Jira internally for my team anyway, not so much the MySQL team, the server team. But a lot of our stuff is tracking the bugs and tracking the components that the bugs are in and the sub areas. On our team we definitely do sub areas of okay, it was this particular component in the product that there was a problem. We use Jira a lot for tracking all of those statistics over time to see where problems are.
Yeah. Okay, well, we got about 5 minutes left. I feel like the well's kind of drying up a little bit now. So, Mark, did you want to solicit some feedback on SYS, or do you want to hold off till next time for that?
I'll hold off. You can come to my talk next week, week after next.
Yep. Yeah, so actually, Oracle Open World's in 2 weeks, or rather the last day of it's 2 weeks from today. So I think we're actually going to punt on the next Hangops and do the next one in 4 weeks. So I'll put up a blog post, put stuff up about that. But yeah, we can definitely talk about, Tim, we can talk about TokuDB stuff, then with the new version. And Mark, you can talk a little bit about SYS and get some feedback from folks about it. And beyond that, are there anything else that people want to talk about the next time? I have a topic from Shlomi about the mixing of data with metadata, so that might also be a good one to slot in. And Jeremy, you had also asked what graphs make a good dashboard. So maybe we can hit that up too next time.
Oh, I'd love to talk about that as well.
Okay,
Right
cool.
down my street.
Alrighty. Any other comments, suggestions for topics, questions? All right. Well, in that case, thanks very much for coming today, everybody, and we'll see y'all in 4 weeks.
So long.
In a couple of weeks, actually.
All right.
Later, guys.
Bye, everyone.